Hey everyone, Ashley May and Nicole Russo here with the Daily Racing Form. A huge card this Saturday out at Turfway Park. 13 races in total, a ton of stakes action, including a Kentucky Oaks point race. Race number 11 on their program is the Bourbonette Oaks. $300,000 on the line and a mile and 16th here on the synthetic. And this is an overflowing field here of fillies. 14 entered in here, 12 in the main body, which means the 13 bracelet and the 14 Classic Appeal are the AEs on the list. But in terms of what we have in the main body, Nicole, the key race looks to be the Cincinnati Trophy back in February down at Turfway Park.
Yeah, the Cincinnati Trophy last month at Turfway, a 16th of a mile shorter than the Bourbonette Oaks, and White Rocks just made all the running, held sway to the line. Admit was coming to her and ran out of ground. A couple of other fillies in this field finished behind them, and we'll certainly delve a little bit more into that race and why this race could unfold differently.
You mentioned White Rock. She had post 4 in the Cincinnati Trophy. She'll have to kind of adjust here with post 11, but maybe her early foot will help her with that. We'll take a look at the time form U.S. pace projections here for the field, and you can see she looks to be part of the mix early. The horse to her outside, Will Then, is also projected based on the first 2 career starts from that daughter of War of Will. And then Just Ruthless was the horse chasing her in the Cincinnati Trophy. And then the other thing, Nicole, here that we note is the 8. The LP flag is attached to the number 8 in here. Golden Sunshine, who's been closing from off of it steadily. Do you kind of agree with this projection on the pace?
I do, but talking to the trainers involved in this race a little bit, Arnaud Delacour, who trains White Rock, said, she doesn't necessarily need the lead. And we do believe that Will Then is going to remain in California to race this coming weekend, from our colleague Brad Free talking to trainer Jonathan Thomas. So that would certainly ease things up a little bit for the other ones looking for that lead.
And absolutely. And then this will adjust in the event of scratches. You can see Bracelet might be in the mix. And even I would say Zealous Moon was a little bit closer last time out in her first Tapeta try down at Gulfstream Park. They have her pretty far back in here. I don't know if I agree with that, but obviously a couple of the fillies that might be in the mix, you can see 10, 11, and 12 if they choose to stay in the spot. So let's jump right into it, Nicole. Huge field here. We'll kick it off with the filly on the inside, the number 1 Resolve here for Leonard Powell. She's just 1 for 7 in her career, but pretty impressive in her last 2. She's been able to close on a nice horse such as Super Speed, and then last time out just a little short behind Amarita.
Yeah, one of a couple in here coming in from turf starts in California. And I liked her last effort where she kind of sat just off, pounced, just missed. I think breaking from the rail, though, in this big field, it's going to be difficult to work out a similar trip.
Umberto Rispoli is booked to ride her for the first time so far in her career. The number 2, Something About Here for Brendan Walsh, was able to win the Mazarine late last year up at Woodbine, went to the sideline, and she finished 3rd in her return to the races. That is the Cincinnati Trophy. And I think the promising thing about that effort is she's a little further back than she was in the Mazarine, and the pace not that different, but she was at least able to close there to finish 3rd, just missing by 2.5.
Yeah, and the track was really favoring forwardly placed horses that weekend. We saw it in the Cincinnati Trophy. We saw it in the brother race, the Battaglia Memorial, the following night. It was difficult to make up ground late. She did so, and she did so on a night when she might have needed the race, her first start in several months.
The 3, Admit, was the runner-up in the Cincinnati Trophy. Prior to that, had back-to-back wins at Turfway Park. She's been ridden by Irvin Moncada to this point in her career there, and a rider that's certainly taken a lot of notes and presence, and people are starting to notice what Moncada has been able to do. I think in terms of getting along with this filly, he really does get along with her, has been able to place her and to kind of get her to move up. And I think in terms of the way she traveled late, another one that looked very good in the stretch.
Yeah, and she gets more ground to work with here, and based on her breeding, certainly should appreciate that. I actually talked to trainer Tommy Drury a little bit before we began shooting here, and he said, take nothing away from the winner. I don't know that we were going to catch her, but I would like to see this filly a little bit more forwardly placed, especially breaking more toward the inside. So he's really focused on that in her recent workouts to see if he can have her a little bit sharper. And you discussed Irving Moncada, apprentice rider, one of the leading riders this winter meet at Turfway Park, and has a big chance, a couple of big chances on this card to earn his way into the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby.
The 4 Zealous Moon, we'll take a look at her most recent effort. That was her first try on a synthetic surface, the Tapeta down at Gulfstream Park. She was a little bit closer, and it was a compact field, which I think helped her. But in terms of the way she's going to kick on here, she has to work for it. But I liked this performance from her. I think in her last two, prior to this, she needed to show more, and she showed a lot of fight in this spot.
Yeah, showed a lot of fight, a very good effort here last out at Gulfstream. And then two back at Gulfstream was actually third against Colts on the turf at Gulfstream. So this is one that might be moving in the right direction.
And not to ignore it, there was some action there in the stretch, as you saw in the replay, where the horse had to check up out of it. And there was a disqualification there of Hello, 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 the runner up. Next up in the field, the 5, Bless the Broken, who's intriguing, cross-entered in the Fairgrounds Oaks. And we did that preview as well, Nicole, and talked about her there. This would be a surface change for her. But I think in terms of her running style, I wonder what sort of trip she could get in here. She's typically been closing from off of it. And when you go to the races, even last time out or 2 starts back, she's been last early in closing. I wonder how the track will play to her this weekend.
She's one that will benefit if there is a hot pace early on with a couple of forwardly placed horses that we mentioned in here, fillies who want to be forward. One of her better efforts was 2 back in the Silver Bullet Day on a sloppy track. And, sometimes it's very interesting because of conformation, hoof shape, the way they get into a track. Sometimes sloppy track performance can translate over to good turf or synthetic performance or vice versa.
Absolutely. The number 6 getting after it up next in the field. She is a filly that was able to break her maiden at Turfway Park in her first start as a 3-year-old filly. And then she came back to finish second more recently behind Verity, a very nice winner and a heavily backed horse in that spot. And I think it's interesting to look at who she has booked to ride her this weekend. Juan Hernandez riding here for these connections.
Yeah, a bunch of her connections coming in from California for this rich card, 6 stakes worth a couple million combined. So this is one. Getting after it, the big question with her, obviously looking at her past performances, will be stretching out with her 3 efforts, all coming at 6 furlongs. That being said, by Violence, a son of classic sire Medaglia d'Oro, Violence has sired Grade 1 winners around both 1 and 2 turns over a Birdstone mare from a very good family.
The 7, As Catch Can, we'll take a look at her most recent performance and a little bit of a change of tactics. I feel like Jonathan Thomas likely just used this as a setup race to get her ready for her next effort. This was 6.5 on the downhill at Santa Anita in the Sweet Life. And she's not going to get to Kosaloo in the end, but she is second best in this field. It was actually a bigger field than we're used to sometimes seeing a field of 9. And I just don't think she wants to go that short. When you look at her efforts up at Woodbine, I think we're talking about a 2-turn horse that needs to go distances greater than a mile. And her efforts up there on the Tapete up at Woodbine, they have both suggested that if she can take a step forward in figures, which she did last time out on the turf, that she could be a contender.
I would agree with that opinion. I think, the last start was a prep in the true sense of the word, was second in the Mazarin. So if you like something about her who we discussed earlier, I think you have to look at this one a little bit, perhaps at a little bit of a value.
The 8, Golden Sunshine, up next here for Owen Hardy, who's had a very good meet at Turfway Park, 7 for 23. He's going to send out a filly that just broke her mating. She did it very impressively, and I guess if you backed her in that race, your heartbreak was over. She was previously favored in her prior 3 efforts, but she did it so nicely in a filly that I think when you go to the efforts 2 and 3 back, she just didn't get the setup. She was closing from off of it, and they were going 49 and 2 to the half, and just really wasn't getting the race flow that she needed. And I have to think on Saturday, this is obviously a big step up, Nicole, but I don't think she's going to be seeing 49 to the half.
No, we mentioned it up front with the time form pace projector. This is one who is flagged as she would really appreciate the pace in front of her. And perhaps this is one that you're going to use in your exotics because it is a big step up in class at a price.
The 9, Fixin' to Be Here for Calumet Farm. She's going to make a surface change. Primarily, she's been campaigned on the turf. They tried her on the dirt once in the Goldenrod. And if you go to the race 2 back, you go to 3 back, look at the winners. Nitrogen, who has stamped herself as such a big filly on the grass, and then Good Cheer and Quiet Side, and even Eclatant, 3 starts back. I don't know what to make out of her last effort. I was a little disappointed. She just didn't have any sort of a late punch in there, but I guess it's promising that Vixen came back to win next time out, and maybe the surface is enough to wake her up.
Well, you look at the competition this filly is faced and the form she's shown at various levels, and On the one hand, I don't think there's a good cheer or a quiet side in here. Those two are the Kentucky Oaks favorites at this moment, about 6 weeks out. But on the other side, it's hard to ignore that Fixin' to Be has struggled in her stakes level attempts.
The 10 Just Ruthless up next. She took a fair bit of support in the Cincinnati Trophy, and she chased the pace in there, and she just sort of backpedaled. And I think sometimes when you see how a race plays out, when you're chasing, you're certainly at the disadvantage. And if she gets a race flow maybe similar to 2 starts back, she could be a major threat. She looked very good winning that race on December 26th.
Looked very, very good, and obviously likes this track quite a bit. I just think, as you said, she just was not comfortable last time. She was chasing, she was trying to make something happen, ultimately couldn't, and just sort of backpedaled. I think that if she can get comfortable here, I think she can show that punch that she showed a couple starts back.
The 11 White Rock, she's been a little bit talked about since that performance in the Cincinnati Trophy, and I liked her in that spot, Nicole. I think when you look at how the race was run, Victor Crosco made a little bit of an aggressive move, but I think he probably, as a rider, was shocked no one else was anywhere close to him and was able to open up this sizable lead. They really couldn't keep up and is able to hold on. I don't think Victor really got after her until kind of straightening out there in the stretch, and she still wins by a length and a quarter. Whether you like her or not, I think if you like her, it's not necessarily based on her tactics last time out. I just don't see that being what happens. And with that said, I think she's shown that she has the ability to adapt. She showed that on debut. She ran much faster last time out on the front end than she did 2 starts back. So I just think she's adjustable. I think, yes, she won, and that's something to like. But I think if you're trying to back her here, it's not with the mindset that last time out is going to be a sort of a repeat circumstance this weekend.
And I had an interesting conversation this week working on our race previews with trainer Arnaud Delacour that sort of backs up what you're saying, that, it's not going to be necessarily a carbon copy of the Cincinnati Trophy. He said that, obviously with the weather in Kentucky, some horses at Turfway missed a chunk of training over the winter. The track was frozen. They adjusted racing dates. They adjusted training hours. And he said that this filly, who's a little higher strung by nature, being from that Tappet line, was just sort of very headstrong going into the Cincinnati Trophy, and that Victor Crosco used that to their advantage. He thinks that coming into this race, they've been in a steadier pattern. The edge is off. Certainly she'll be forwardly placed, but she doesn't necessarily need the lead, certainly won't be leading by 8 lengths heading into the far turn.
Yeah, you bring up great information. I mean, she could be on the lead, but I wouldn't be surprised if she is not the pace setter here. I could see her rating sitting in second or third, especially with her post. So great info there that you were able to get from Arnaud Delacour. And then rounding out the main body, Nicole, is the 12 Will Venn, who you mentioned might not opt for this spot, might stay out west at this point, but was very impressive winning towards the end of November at Del Mar, and just was able to kind of back up that maiden score right back in the entry box and to do it impressively again.
Yeah, and her presence or lack thereof would impact the pace scenario of this race. Our colleague Brad Free spoke to Jonathan Thomas this week, and as we said, one of his fillies will come here to run at Turfway. Will then expected to stay home in California to run it in the China Doll this weekend out there at Santa Anita. Our time form pace projector has her on the engine from an outside post. Removing her from the equation would obviously make things a little bit easier on some of those front runners. We have the 2 also eligibles, Bracelet and Classic Appeal, in that order. If she does scratch as expected, it puts Bracelet into this race.
And Bracelet, obviously, I think out of the 2 has the best chance of maybe being around in the end. She was 4th in the Cincinnati Trophy, but we'll have to see who scratches out of here. You mentioned about the 12. We saw another filly in here cross-entered, so it could shake things up a little bit, at least from a pace perspective. So top pick time for the Bourbonette Oaks, and we both go in the same direction. We'll both use Admit on top here from post 3.
Yeah, and I think what I heard from the trainers in discussing this race this week and how they've trained their fillies was just fascinating. Tommy Drury saying he'd like Admit a little bit sharper. Arnaud Delacour saying he thinks White Rocks is a little bit more settled, won't be as sharp. I think that's a really interesting setup that brings these 2 down to the wire together. And, looking at that, I couldn't ignore that I really liked Admit with that little bit of added distance.
It was tough. I went back and forth, back and forth. Who am I going to use on top? And as much as I loved White Rocks, loved what we saw, I did go to Admit just based on her performance last time out. I thought she got a good trip. She was a little further back than she probably wanted to be. Do I think it would have made a difference in where she finished? No, but could maybe make a little bit of an excuse for her. And I just think Irving Moncada is going to be able to get her into a good position close enough to the action early where she's not on the lead, but she sort of has that first run on a lot of horses in here that I feel like might be deep closers, Nicole. So 3-11-10-2 for Nicole, 3-11-5-8 for me. A great field this Saturday out at Turfway Park in the Bourbonette Oaks. Good luck.